George Washington's dream, navigation on the Potomac River, the Potomac Company. One technical note, my sound is not working, so I'm going to try to get the sound louder by using the microphone I'm using with the PC. If it doesn't work, we'll just move on, that's all. Okay. So this is the Potomac River on a summer morning, any summer morning. It's quite lovely. Very common to see eagles right down in the water, grabbing fish with their talons. Great blue herons standing there very patiently, waiting for little fish to go by. You'll see anglers fishing for catfish and for smallies. Occasional kayaker, canoes. It's very, very lovely. Very lovely. But did you know that between 1800 and 1830, 200,000 tons of freight passed down this river from the rich farmlands of the Piedmont and later from the newly developed West? This is worth almost $400 million, okay? And the reason this is before the C&O Canal. Marylanders know it's before the C&O Canal, all right? It's before railroads, it's before all this, it's between the late 18th century and 1828. And the reason that happened was because of George Washington's Potomac Company. Now, what was Washington's dream? This is a great quote, so I'm just going to read it because it's worth listening to. The Potomac River then is the center of the Union. It is the river more than any other, in my opinion, which must, in the natural progress of things, connect by its inland navigation the Atlantic states with the vast region which is populating beyond all conception to the westward of it. It is designated by law for the seat of the empire and must, from its extensive course through a rich and populous country, become in time the grand emporium of North America. Now, Washington always put his money where his mouth was, so he proceeded to make that happen. All right, let's get an overview of the Potomac River because people aren't really familiar with this river. And let's start from Point Lookout, right here. And this is where the Potomac River empties into the Chesapeake Bay and then heads out into the ocean, all right? This whole area here, all right, is, of course, a tidal. Okay. This whole area, of course, is the tidal estuary. The tides go all the way up past Washington, Georgetown, where Little Falls begin, where the Piedmont, where the fall zone begins. All right. So if we then move up, all right, we get to Mount Vernon. Moving forward, we get to, then we get up to Great Falls. Moving further up, we get to Harper's Ferry. What's very important about Harper's Ferry, from this standpoint, is that's where the Shenandoah River begins. The Shenandoah River goes almost 100 miles into the countryside and then splits into two rivers and goes another 100 miles. If we keep moving along, we get to Old Town. Now, what happens in Old Town is very important. In Old Town, the Potomac River is joined together from its north branch and its south branch. You see the north branch and the south branch? And what's very important is this is the most northwestern direction towards Pittsburgh, towards the Ohio River, right here. And that is the town of Cumberland, Maryland. Remember the town of Cumberland, Maryland. Cumberland, Maryland is really important in this whole discussion. Okay, and then we continue to the source of the North Branch, which is here at the Fairfax Stone, and I'll show you that. And we continue to the source of the South Branch. Be careful with the South Branch, because the South Branch breaks up into the South Fork and the North Fork. So this is the South Fork of the South Branch of the Potomac River, and the North Fork of the south branch of the Potomac River. Very confusing to all the trout fishermen, but they managed to catch trout nevertheless. Here's the main river, and it ends right here in Highland, Virginia. So that's sort of an overview of what the river does, all right? Now, the other thing about this river, which is very important, is it drains about 15,000 square miles, and it affects 5 states. Well, 5 states. It affects Virginia, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and Pennsylvania. See here, it doesn't go into Pennsylvania, but because the Maryland border is so close to the Pennsylvania border, see this? It's still, Pennsylvania drains into the Potomac, and then West Virginia.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Why isn't the Shenandoah River the south branch of the Potomac River? Who decided which was which?
That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Maybe in my next lecture, I'll have an answer for you. I never even thought about that.
It was a big dispute.
Well, it's sort of interesting. I'm sure it was, but it's interesting. Well, let me show you a picture later of something else. All right, and stop asking all these difficult questions. Is this his job here? Is that what he does? He sits there and asks questions I can't answer?
Only for my friends.
All right, only for his friends. Great. Okay. So what else did I want to say before I was rudely interrupted? Okay, how long is the Potomac River? Well, the Potomac doesn't whether you start here, whether you start here at the beginning of the North Branch or you start here at the South Branch. So these two branches come together in Old Town. The river from Old Town all the way out to Point Lookout is 302 miles long. All right, 302 miles long. The North Branch is 101 miles long, and the South Branch is 131 miles long. So add 131 to 302, or add 101 to 302, whatever you want, and that's how long the river is. Usually the North Branch is considered the primary one. All right, what else did I want to say here? Okay, that's enough on that. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's get a little more detailed. So here is a picture of Point Lookout. And this is where the Potomac River, which is 11 miles wide from here to here, enters into the Chesapeake Bay and out into the ocean. If you go up about, how many miles? I'm not really sure. I think it's about, I had the miles, but I lost it. Okay. If you go up a little further, you get to Mount Vernon. There it is. 85 miles up from Point Lookout, you get to Mount Vernon. Architects in the room who are interested in that porch, that piazza, it's 96 feet long, has flagstone surface, it has 8 wooden pillars, and they're 18 feet high. What's important? What did Washington see when he sat on that porch? You sat on the porch, right? Almost everyone here has sat. What did you see? Well, you see the Potomac River, and of course nowadays it's as I described in the first slide. It's very Eden-like. But what did Washington see? Well, Washington saw, first of all, small boats being pulled up towards Alexandria and Georgetown, filled with tobacco early on and grain later on. In other words, raw materials from the plantations were going up to the major ports upriver in Alexandria to be shipped out all over the world. That's one thing he saw. So the other thing he saw was these huge freight ships, I guess you'd call them, sail ships that carried freight, sailing right back by his house up to Alexandria carrying finished goods. All right? This is the colonial problem. And he saw it right from his house. All they were doing downriver was all of these raw materials that were going out essentially to the British, and in return, they were getting all the finished goods, and they weren't allowed to produce those finished goods. I will say, by the way, that the wheat, significant amounts of the wheat that went from the port of Alexandria went to the sugar islands, where the enslaved sugar islands, because the people who owned plantations to the sugar islands, you wouldn't expect them not to plant sugar and plant food. I mean, after all, that's not, so they would buy food and a lot of that wheat that we produce went over to those sugar islands. I'll get to that later. But anyway, that's what George Washington saw, all right? He's 11 miles from Alexandria. He's 2 miles from the port of Georgetown. He's 85 miles from Point Lookout. Now, here's a problem. So it's a totally navigable river up to Alexandria, right? Totally navigable. But what happens when you get to Little Falls, just above Georgetown? Well, when you get to Little Falls, you get into the fall zone in the Piedmont, you can't go any further. That's it. You can't go further. All right, that is a significant problem that's gestating in Washington's mind on how we're going to solve that significant problem. For people who don't understand what I'm talking about, let me just give you a little taste of Little Falls in the winter when there's a lot of.
You don't want to go there now.
Yeah, I'm sorry you can't hear the sound, but actually I'll turn the sound up a little. But you can see it's a difficult passage. It's not always like this, but this is a dramatic example of what it looks like. And
is that you?
yeah, that's me. Absolutely. Okay. And of course, Great Falls. How many people have not been to Great Falls? On the Virginia side, I don't care about Maryland. No care. Anyone here from Maryland? All right, all my insults about Maryland are good fun. Oh, all right, good.
I got thick skin.
All right, good. Then you'll be fine. So, that's Great Falls. I mean, I took that picture 4 months ago. Obviously, you're not going to get a ship through there. All right. I'm sorry, the sounds are dramatic. Okay, moving up, we get to yes, we get to Harper's Ferry. Now, what's at Harper's Ferry? The most significant thing at Harper's Ferry in the early 18th century is the Shenandoah River comes in at Harper's Ferry. So you have the Shenandoah River, right? And then you have the Potomac North Branch. Now notice this, what do you see here? Notice there's all kinds of rapids and all kinds of problems here. That's another thing they're going to have to address, and we'll get to that later. Then we keep going up further, and we get to my favorite spot, which is right about a mile downriver from Old Town, and it's where the South Branch here meets the North Branch here. So this is a spot where two great rivers end, and one great river begins. It's very dramatic. Nothing happens, it's just very quiet, but it's really quite fascinating. Here's me standing there right by the end of the North Branch. That's at Old Town.
That's a nice picture.
Yeah, John took the picture, everybody. Okay.
We just took it.
Okay.
I have one comment.
Yeah.
I am a little sensitive. Remember, that's our river.
I'll get to that. Yeah, in 1630, some aristocrat king gave it to you. And, you know, I don't really respect that, but that's okay. We'll get to that later. Okay. Now, let's get to the actual headwaters of the North Branch. The headwaters are in Davis, West Virginia. See here? Davis, West Virginia has the distinction of being the highest town in West Virginia in two ways. It's a joke, everyone. It's actually true. My sisters lived there for many, yeah, anyway. Okay, so Davis is, oh, I don't know, it's about, let's see. It's a tiny little town. Its elevation is 31 feet above sea level, population of 581, it's in Tucker County, and it's the highest incorporated town in West Virginia in more ways than one. Now, it is about, how many miles? About 100 miles, I think, from Winchester. Let's see. Yes, it's 154 miles from Frederick and 101 miles from Winchester. Just this Winchester over here, you can't see it, and here it is, okay? So when we can get that box to disappear? It's blocking the map. Oh, yes, I can. There we go. Okay. All right. So let's go over there and see what it is. If you go to Davis, drive about 15 minutes, you get to Fairfax Stone State Park, which is a Virginia state park. And right there, there's a stone, which is the stone that was set the western limit of the Fairfax estate, and it also sets the Maryland and West Virginia border. More interesting to me is this. This is the headwater of the Potomac North Branch, right there, okay? And let's take a closer look at it.
Is it the north or the south? North.
North.
Okay.
North. Okay, so this is, let's take a closer look at this. Okay. So you can see there's very little water in there, okay? Just a little puddle.
Spring,
Huh?
just a
A
spring.
little tiny spring. It's the headwater. It just comes out of the ground and becomes the actual mighty Potomac River. And you move along here, you see not much happening. All right. It's hard to see on this, but then so you'll see some water. But then if we go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Now, this is about 100 feet away. Now you can see there's water. And if you keep walking, it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's actually where the North Branch begins. And a few hundred miles away, it's what, 11 miles wide? Right? Think about that. Think of what it's doing in its pathway. Okay. South Branch, don't worry, we'll get to George Washington soon. Okay. To go to the South Branch, this is really, you guys should all do this. You have to go to Highland County, Virginia. Now, Highland County, Virginia is more than 3 hours down Route 81, okay? And it's, you go to 81, the 3 hours, and you head west, and you're going into Highland County, which is the Switzerland of Virginia. It's got the highest mountains in Virginia, and it's just glorious. This is a picture. This is the entrance to the county. See it? And this is what it looks like right next to that sign. All right? The county population is 2,339. Loudoun County's is 443,000. Just give you a comparison. All right? Now, I was determined to get to the South Branch. Very few people have been there, actually. So I went down to Highland, and I went to the county seat, which you can't see here because this thing's in the way. Oh, that's too bad. Anyway, the county seat is called Monterey. It's got a population, I think, of 172. So that's Monterey there. And I stayed in this little maple syrup inn. You see this in this old thing from the 1920s. And after I unpacked my bags, I went down to the restaurant, the whole bunch of people were eating. And I sat down with the locals, and I showed them this map. And I said, Google tells me that the headwaters of the South Branch are right here. If I go there, will I be shot? Silence. The waitress said, give me the map. She went away for 10 minutes. We're talking more. She comes back. I said, yeah. She goes, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Now, I don't know what she did. I don't know if she found out who the landowner is and figured he was not going to shoot me, whether they don't ever shoot people in Highland County, or whether or not she actually checked with her. I said, okay, great. So I got up, this is it. That's the little county seat, Monterey. And I started driving here on Mountain Turnpike. See this? Mountain Turnpike. And when I got right here, I was a place very fascinating because right here on Mountain Turnpike, if you spit out of the left side of the car, the left window, it goes into the James River. And if you spit on the right side, it goes into the Potomac River. So this is right on the edge of the Eastern Continental Divide between those two river basins. And there's even a farm. See this farm? It's called Dividing Waters Farm because when the rain falls on the house, it goes into the James River, and when the rain falls on the barn, it goes into the Potomac River. Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. That's why I added this in here. Okay. Now, let's move on. So I followed the route. I took a right on Maple Sugar Road. I made a left on Sweet Pea Lane. See this? I ended up on this dirt road in an apple orchard. The apples had all fallen, and you get that sickly, sweet smell of rotting apples. You're not sure if you like it or hate it. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. And then I got to a fence, and I climbed the fence, walked 100 yards, and I saw this. And I said, holy mackerel. I didn't think I said holy mackerel. I said, here I am at the headwater. Get back there. At the headwater. Let me show you. Boom. So this is the headwater of the South Branch. The water comes just out of the ground right here. And as we move along to the right, you'll see even in 15 feet, it gets broader and broader.
And balance slowly.
And that's where the river comes from.
I was always under the impression it was just drainage from surface water.
Well, there's always a headwater, which is usually a spring.
I didn't know.
Yeah, so no, these are two springs that form the river, which I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating. To me, that is really something to think about, right? That these tiny little springs, you know, and 200 miles later, the damn thing is 11 miles wide, not 400 miles later, the thing's 11 miles wide. Extraordinary. Anyway, so this is it. And then it went off into the field. So it's in a cow field in Highland, Virginia. And you can go and you won't get shot. Anyway, we should get back to George Washington. Okay, so then so I just want you to give you a review of the Potomac River. All right, this is what we're going to do. And now we're going to keep going. Washington and his collaborators didn't just look at the Potomac itself. This is a map, typical map drawn in 1800. Notice it has the Potomac North Branch, but what does it also have? All of the tributaries. Because what they're thinking is the tributaries are also navigable. So that means it's not just a question of the Potomac being navigable, but we can go out to all these tributaries. This is a little pamphlet written by Tobias Lear, Washington's personal secretary. And it's called Observations on the River Potomac. And it's all about the tributaries. The South Branch, 17 miles below Cumberland, is navigable 100 miles. So it goes through how navigable all these branches are. And eventually the Potomac Company did address that. All right. George Washington. Surveying was interesting, well-paid work for a healthy youngster who enjoyed the outdoors and had a talent for mathematics, geometry, maps, and detail-oriented tasks. George Washington was born in 1732. In 1748, Lord Fairfax, a neighbor who sort of was very friendly with George through his whole young life, says to George, I'm sending a surveying party out to West Virginia. You want to go? He goes, yeah, he's 16 years old. And off he goes. He comes back. He's completely excited. He goes in the basement and finds his father's old surveying tools, all dusty, you know, and he takes them, he dusts them off. And at 17 years old, he becomes a professional surveyor. He's hired by the College of William and Mary, and they have land out in Western Virginia that they once surveyed. He goes out and surveys. In 1750, he begins to work for himself as a surveyor, does a lot of work around Winchester. And between the ages of 16 and 19, he did more than 200 surveys of 60,000 acres. Most important, litigation-free. People were very litigious in those days. Well, I guess they are nowadays too. Americans haven't changed. They were litigious then, they're litigious now. Okay, and he was none of his surveys were ever really challenged because they were so accurate. Okay, in 1752, in a typical colonial governor arbitrary move that doesn't make any sense, the governor says 6% of all surveyors' salaries are going to support the College of William and Mary. Boom. Washington says, well, I think it's time to quit. But something else happened. His brother had died, and now he was essentially the owner of Mount Vernon. This is a picture of two of his surveys, just to give you an idea. You talk about Washington's surveys. This is a picture of two of them. The one on the left is 4 Mile Run from 1799, Wool, the 8th survey. And the one on the right is near Paw Paw, West Virginia. Just to give you a sense of what those surveys look like. Okay, so his brother dies in 1752. Washington is now a landowner. He really wants to have an occupation that's more fitting to a landowner, so he gets himself appointed to the military. Okay, he's now adjutant for Southern Virginia. The governor Dinwiddie, I love that governor's name, Dinwiddie. Governor Dinwiddie is sends him out to the Ohio Valley, essentially, area, to warn the French to get the heck out of there. And he does, but it's a 2.5 mile trek into the Ohio Valley, okay? I'm repeating this because I want you to get a sense that Washington was completely familiar with all of this property going way out to the west, all right? In 1754, in July, French and Indian War, he personally goes up to Cumberland, Maryland, and he canoes 170 miles down the river, looking at its navigability because he knows that the Braddock is going to need supplies, okay? What does he discover? I'll tell you what he discovers when he does this, okay? He discovers a couple of things. From Cumberland, he can go 120 miles to Harper's Ferry without anything in the way. That's what he discovered, all right? At Harper's Ferry, there were problems. And then from Harper's Ferry, he could go 20 miles to Seneca Falls, Seneca Breaks.
Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls. Is it called Seneca Falls? Yeah, that's what your Maryland is called. To Seneca Falls, okay, he'd go 20 miles, and then he's clear up to 2 miles to Great Falls. So he's really encouraged. Think about what he's in a canoe, of course, okay? And he's in obviously the best conditions, water conditions. But he goes and he tries to convince the British to use this as a route. Braddock says no, and Braddock decides to build the famous Braddock Road. From where? From Cumberland. Remember I said it was important. Cumberland, Maryland to Fort Duquesne, it's actually to Pittsburgh. He builds this road, all right? Let's move on. Oh, and he says, I forgot this. Washington says there is no other obstacle than the shallowness of the water to prevent craft from passing all the way to Great Falls. All right?
So
this is in 1754.
Did he canoe over Great Falls?
No, of course not. Okay. All right. So in total, George Washington treks across the Alleghenies and into the Ohio watershed 6 times in major treks. All right. So this is a man who was, well, I'll talk about it. I'll talk about his character in this sense in a minute. Okay. What's important? If you go to Braddock's Road, Braddock's Road starts here in Cumberland. See it? And it moves all the way to Fort Duquesne. Now, what's Washington thinking about? He's thinking about getting goods and freight to Cumberland, where he knows if he just canoe down the Potomac, it's an easy ride right down to Great Falls. But he's already thinking about the fact that he doesn't want freight to take Braddock's Road. He's looking at the Navigable River. He's looking at all the other river systems here to figure out if there's a way they could go from Pittsburgh on river systems so that they would only have to portage a very short distance to Cumberland. All right, so there's the road. All right. By the way, to go from Cumberland with a canoe to Georgetown, he figured it would take 4 or 5 days. All right. Now let's move on this thing.
It's pretty quick.
Okay. Now, take a look at the Yacougaty River. The Yacougaty River, okay? The Yacougaty River flows into the Monongahela River. This is the Monongahela River, right? That's where the Keysport is, right here. The Keysport is here. And from that, it meets the Allegheny River and becomes the Ohio River, all right? So you see Washington's great interest in the Allegheny River because it's a way he's hoping to extend transportation and avoid a significant amount of being on Braddock's Road. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, it's important because that's, you know. All right, now, skip ahead, 1784, the Revolution. Everyone who talks about Washington after the Revolution talks about, some of them with tongue-in-cheek, about all he talks about is making the Potomac navigable. Here's just an example of one guy, Robert Hunter. Says the general sent the bottle around pretty freely after dinner and gave success to the navigation of the Potomac for its toast, which he was very much at heart, and when finished will, I suppose, be the first river of the world. All right? And Washington is saying these kinds of things. Settlers were pouring into the Iron Country faster than anyone would imagine. It was important to prevent the trade of the Western Territory from settling in the hands of the Spanish to the south or the British to the north. If the inhabitants should form commercial connections with these other kinds, they would be in a few years as unconnected with us and would soon be alienated. All right, now let's look at that for a second. What did the nation look like, say, in 1784? All right, you had all these mountains, right, which is separating the east from this huge population burgeoning in the west. Even though it's the British actually were still having forts on the Great Lakes. In fact, even though they're supposed to get rid of them in 1783, they held on until 1796. So the British are up here. The Spanish control all of this, all right, and the Mississippi River. They're not letting Americans go down the Mississippi River, which, you know, is actually from George Washington's standpoint is not bad, because if the Americans are able to start trading down in New Orleans, it means they would be separated from the East Coast. But the Americans can't go down the Mississippi. So this is what it looks like, okay? What I like to say on this is, at this point in American history, if you asked where this country was, you would say the United States are in North America. You would not say the United States is in North America, because of these big separations between all of these former colonies. I mean, it's so interesting things. They had a lot of them had different languages. They had different interests. They did different kinds of business. They had different kinds of currency. I mean, under the Articles of Confederation, they were just very different. In fact, Washington, I just read this, Washington, when he's putting his army together, he used to keep people from different states or colonies separate from each other, because they all had different resistance to diseases. And if you put people together from one part from another, they wouldn't be able to resist the diseases. So at this point, as I like to say, the United States are, not is, all right? So in 1784, you have the mountains split the country. You have breakaway states. I forgot about that. Franklin, you've all seen the movie about Franklin, the breakaway state in Tennessee, which I guess is over here. Okay. So on September 1st, 1784, Washington is going to go on a 680-mile trip into what he describes as the howling wilderness. All right. Why? One object of my journey being to obtain information of the nearest and best communication between eastern and western waters, to facilitate as much as we lay navigation to the Potomac. He's going to look at the Youghiogheny, he's going to look at all the Kanawha, all these other rivers. He's going to take information from every person he meets. Hold on, let's move on. Okay, just because I thought you'd find it cool, here's who he took on this big journey. 3 servants with horses, Dr. James Craig, his best friend, who was at his deathbed, his Bushrod Washington, his nephew, and William Craig James, his son. Now, I'm not going to read this, but here's what they brought with them. Think about your last camping trip. What did you bring with you? I bet you wish you had brought cherry bounce. Anyway, that's what they brought with them. They stopped in Leesburg and they bought a horse fell in a frying pan. They went at 5 miles an hour, apparently, at a trot. Okay, a few nights into the trek, he is at a town called Bath, because it was trying to imitate the Roman baths, now called Berkeley Springs. Most of you have probably been to Berkeley Springs. And he stays in an inn, and the guy who owns the inn is a guy named Rumsey. And they're talking, and what's Washington talking about? Navigating the Potomac River. So Rumsey says, General, I have invented a boat that can go upriver. And Washington is struck, because this is a key concern. You could connect all this stuff. How do you go home? Right? You come down the river to the ports. How do you go home? Getting back upriver. Now, the way people got upriver in those days, like I said earlier, how did Washington get his tobacco and his wheat up to the shipping ports up in Alexandria? They poled it. You pole, all right? That's how you would do it, right? They didn't have Mercury engines. So what Rumsey did was he didn't invent a new technology. This is interesting. He just extended the existing technology. Instead of having 4 men with poles, he invented a machine that the water current would turn a wheel which would make four poles go up and push, up and push. Isn't that interesting? In other words, he didn't invent new technology. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was just a way of having the polling being done by a machine. And he showed Washington a little model of it about this big on a little stream back behind the inn. And Washington was just floored. He said, "This is astounding," literally. He said that. And he said that one of the best things about it is any mechanic can maintain it. It's very simple. And Washington gives Rumsey this certificate, all right, saying that Rumsey's developed the art of propelling boats upriver. And he says, "I have no doubt that the value of this is greatly enhanced by the simplicity of the works, etc." Rumsey showed this around for the rest of his life, this certificate about this thing. Rumsey eventually did invent a boat that ran by steam, but it was sort of like a jet ski initially. It shot the water, the steam shot the water out the back, all right? And I'm not going to go into steamboats because there's such a big argument between all the various people who thinks they invented steamboats, Fulton, Rumsey, etc. But here's a great book if you want to read about the battle of who invented the steamboats. It's called Steamboats Come True by James Flexner. All right. So he meets Rumsey. This is a monument, by the way, that you'll find in Shepherdstown to Rumsey. West Virginia celebrates him as the inventor of the steamboat. And who am I to deny West Virginia that privilege? Okay. September 9th, which is 5 days after they left, they end up in Old Town. Remember what Old Town is? Old Town is where the two branches come together to form the Potomac. But Old Town is where old man Colonel Cressap lived. Now, people in Maryland know Colonel Cressap because they learned about him in their history. I was completely ignorant about this time. But anyway, so Cressap had been there since apparently the 1730s or the 1720s. And he was an old man. He was a prototypical frontiersman, a hustler, incapable of fear, foul-mouthed, mean as a rattlesnake. And they called him the Rattlesnake Colonel, a vile rascal, and the Maryland Monster. Now, supposedly, he was personally responsible for the war that Pennsylvania fought with Maryland in 1730. There was a border war in 1730, which it's still new to me. And they kept fighting each other until.
And some people think it was refugees from that war that settled Lovettsville.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh,
that's interesting. So they had this war, and it went on until the king said, "Cut it out," apparently. But Cressap was captured by the Pennsylvanians and taken to Philadelphia. And it is said that he got his jailers going nuts because every few minutes he'd yell out, "Philadelphia, prettiest town in Maryland." Anyway, so he was a real old cuss. And Washington stopped, everyone stopped there because this was the main trading post before you went off into the wilderness. Indians would stop there to get guns and everything. Washington stopped there, and Paul Kreingold stopped there. And Joe Achenbach, who wrote a book about all this, writes something very nice. So I'm going to read it, okay? He said, "It may be difficult to imagine General George Washington spending the evening around a campfire with the Maryland Monster, but they had much in common. They were both landholders and original explorers in the wilderness. They were both tough men who were undaunted by bad weather, bad food, dangerous Indians, and desperate white men. And they both forged paths through this country when it was quite wild." Washington does not record his conversation with Cressap in his diary, but it was probably about their common past and visions of the future. So I just thought that was an interesting thing. Anyway, you should go to Old Town, because if you do, you can take the only private toll road on the East Coast, which is what this car is going over. And I wish you could hear the sound, because as it goes over, all you hear is pop, 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 as those loose, unconnected wooden boards pop up and down. It's $1.50.
I've been across that bridge.
You're a great man like me. Isn't that a great bridge? Look at that. Anyway, that's just for fun.
What did it cost? $1.50?
$1.50 or something like that. I don't really remember. But it's a flood bridge. The idea is that there's a flood, it's easy to repair, it doesn't require much. Anyway. Okay. Washington returns from this trip. Okay. And the most amazing lobbying takes place. Now, I'm going to read through this I hate doing stuff like that, but I've got to give you a sense of the speed. Remember, there are no telephones. There's no texting, okay? The only means of communication is letters on horseback or carriages or ships, all right? Well, watch what happens. October 4th, Washington returns from the West, and if you read his diary, which I have, there's a 15-page entry, which is so dense it's hardly readable, and it's about all the rivers that people told him about. Many of them hadn't even seen them, but everything that people told him about rivers that can join with other rivers, he wrote down in his diary, all right? On December 2nd, all of a sudden, an anonymous article appears in the in the Maryland Gazette. On December 13th, George Washington meets with Virginia legislators. On December 22nd, he meets with Maryland legislators. On January 16th, both legislators have passed enabling acts for a company. And on February 8th, 1785, the Potomac Company opens its books. 241 years to the day today. Isn't that fun? It's my birthday also today. So 3 great things. All right. All right. And the Potomac Company is founded. With almost immediately, they have about $10 million invested to do this. George Washington is appointed president, and James Rumsey is appointed the superintendent. And that is the beginning of the Potomac Company. But something else happens, and this is really interesting. After the Potomac Company is founded, they got commissioners together from Maryland and Virginia. They had to meet. Because why? Because you have this river which belongs to Maryland. Virginia is building things on it. So you have to have discussions about governance, right? What kind of tolls, what kind of currency you're going to use, what about tariffs? I mean, there's a whole array of things you have to discuss. So these commissioners came together to discuss this question. They're going on for about 4 or 5 days, and they don't seem to be getting anywhere. So Washington says, come to Mount Vernon. I'll put you up, give you meals, you'll have privacy, you can discuss this. And in a few days, they come out with something called the Mount Vernon Compact, which is a calling for a larger meeting in Annapolis with representatives of all 13 states. That happens on September 1st. They have to have 7 delegates, 7 states for a quorum. They don't get it, so they say, okay, let's call for a continental convention in May of 1787, and that's where the Constitution came from. So what's very sort of fascinating about this, you should listen, if you don't think George Washington was in the middle of that, of all these discussions, of course he was. But it's sort of interesting that one of the things that came out of this was the immediate meetings about the Constitution. Okay.
And he traveled by horse.
Yes, and he traveled by horse, a white horse. Yes. No, unless it's a question. No, we don't have time. I'm later ready. Okay. Let's talk about the Potomac Company. They have 3 choices to make in-river navigation on the Potomac. One choice is the Stillwater Canal, like the C&O Canal. That's great because you can go upriver, you can go downriver, not a problem. There is a problem though. They didn't know how to make, there was nobody then in 1785 who knew, in America, who knew how to make locks. And not locks that goes on bagels, locks for canals, okay? Nobody knew how to make it, all right? And it was very expensive, really. So they said, that's that's not gonna happen. The next thing they could have done is pull a dam and lock. This is interesting. You dam up the river, you do a series of dams in the river, and you turn the river into a lake, a series of lakes. So now the river is a series of lakes, and on each dam you have a lock, so that basically the boats go from lake to lake and through a lock to the next lake. Now, besides the fact that they had no one who could do locks, really expensive to maintain. Could you imagine maintaining, what, 50 or 100 dams on the Potomac River? After the winter storms, when they all wrecked, etc. So that was not going to happen. The third option was called sluice and bypass, which is what they decided to do. What's a sluice? In a sluice, you essentially dig a channel with black powder, you blow up a channel in the riverbed, you build dams on the entrance like this, so that the water is essentially channeled into the sluice. You put a buoy there so that boats coming down the river see the buoy. They know they have to go through the sluice. So they go whoop, right through the sluice. That was what a sluice is. A bypass is when you just build a canal without a lock. All right, you build a canal without a lock, and you can do that only where the drop is very small. All right, and they knew that both of these things would not be useful for little falls or great falls. So the idea was between 1785 about 1792, they did the easy part. They sent two groups of 50 guys up and down the river to build these sluices and bypasses. And I'll give you an example. Okay. So in August 1785, Washington expects the rapids at Harper's Ferry. And remember I talked to you about this? You have all these rapids here, okay? They call it the Shenandoah Falls, the Bull Ring, so they know they're gonna have to build a bypass here. And I think that's called the Long Canal. And it's still there. It was taken over by the C&O Canal. And basically, it's not a canal in the sense of having locks. It is simply a bypass that goes around all of this. Let me catch up to myself because I have some interesting information on that. Okay, the actual drop was 3 feet. So you see you don't need a lock, 3 feet. Basically, that means that you go through that whole long area, you're just moving down 3 feet. So it's kind of a fun ride, I bet, when there's water. Okay, so that was the first thing they did. They took that was easy. The next thing, they went down to Seneca Rocks, okay, which is the 2 parks upriver from Great Falls. You got Great Falls, you got the Riverbend Park, and then I think you have Seneca Park. And if you go up there, you can see, of course, the reason they needed to do it because of this. And if you go up there even today, you'll see the bypass is still there, okay? I don't know what that drop was, but it wasn't very much.
7 feet.
Have you been in a kayak on it? Was it fun? Okay, good. All right, here's a rather romantic, here's a rather romantic picture. This is not what the boats actually look like, but they did have 4 polars, but I just thought to give you a sense of what it looked like.
That's an actual picture.
Yes, that was done by the National Geographic, right,
So it's false.
right. And National Geographic put out something on Potomac Company in the 80s, which is just terrific. Some of the illustrations I use are stolen from them, all right? Now, those were the easy things, all right? There was a lot of stuff that was never documented. I mean, Washington complained about that. These guys just went and did things. I mean, here's an example. So if you go to Riverbend Park, okay, and you go to the dock where you launch the boats, and you walk down 30 feet and you look in the ground, you're going to see a wall under the water. You see that wall? That's a sluice. Let me show you with a video. All right. So, there's a wall here. All right. And then out here, there's something. Is it a wall or was it an island? What was it? But clearly, this is a sluice. All right. A wall along the shore, a channel next to it, and then another wall on the other side. And you can see how it goes along. Now, I have a friend he's the underwater archaeologist for the state of Virginia. I didn't even know such a thing existed, but it's true. And I told him about this. He said, oh, we were there 5 years ago, and I drew a map of what was there, and this is the stone wall that you see, okay? See it? And he said, over here was islands, not another stone wall, it was islands. And I said, how do you know it was islands? He said, go back to the aerial pictures, the earliest aerial picture you could find of that part. And I did, 1923 or I think it was 1924. And in 1924, you notice there were islands here. This is where the wall is over here. Notice there were islands, and this is current. There's no islands anymore. So it's ironic that a wall built by essentially illiterate Irishmen and enslaved men has lasted over 240 years, longer than an island that was built by nature. It's sort of nice to think about it. And I started thinking about that, and it reminded me of that poem by Robert Frost, which you may know. Okay, it's called Mending Wall, where he writes, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends a frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders of the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. Now, this is a Yankee. These Yankee farmers, they couldn't build a wall that lasted a winter. But here you have, these enslaved people with Irishmen who built an immortal wall. I mean, this thing has been around for 240 years, despite floods in the Potomac. It's quite extraordinary. Where is it? Go to Riverbend Park, go to the boat launch, walk down about 150 feet, look in the river. You'll see it, all right? So I find that just great. Apparently, the Southern crew of laborers and enslaved knew something that the Massachusetts farmers did not. The secret of building walls that last forever. Anyway, great wall. Okay, you guys hanging with me here? You ready for how this? Oh, yeah.
Is there one just north of town in Martha's Ferry?
Is there a sluice?
If there's a wall running along there, I walked that house, I don't know why it was there.
Well, there was, you gotta be careful with Harvard Spring. Big industrial area. Yeah, but over the last 200 years, there's all kinds of canals, and they had powered canals that were running. So I wouldn't know the answer to that.
Even the train falling in the water.
Yeah.
Weaverton, there's something like that.
Huh?
At Weaverton, there's some sort of a wall that protrudes out.
It's just along Baker.
Okay, so,
I have a question.
ooh, yeah.
Riverbend Park, is that where the campground is now?
Riverbend Park, everything I'm talking about is Virginia. This was a Virginia operation on the river that Maryland stole from us in 1630.
But it's now West Virginia.
No, here, this is all here. Great Falls Park.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right, you don't have to apologize. Okay, let's get on to part 3, okay? Because now we're gonna talk about actual navigation. Okay, the easy stuff was done. They built the sluices, they built the bypasses. You could go on a good day all the way from, up in, whatever that town, I always forget the name of. What's the most important town I told you to remember? Huh?
Cumberland.
That's right. From Cumberland all the way down to Great Falls. You could do it. But at Great Falls, you had a problem. You know what they did initially? They built what's it called? The slanted chute. They built a wooden chute, and the boats would come up about a mile above Great Falls. They'd unload, the barrels would be rolled down the chute, and boats would pick them up on the other side of Great Falls. They did that for a while. So the idea was we're going to have to get the navigation going to Great Falls and Little Falls. Okay. Now, this is the point where I was going to show you a video of how canals work. This is an example of the Erie Canal, but it's a wonderful 3-minute video. And the nice thing about it, it's like for high school kids. So it's very nice, but I have no sound. So I'm going to skip it, and I apologize. Most of you know how canals work, right? Okay. Sorry about that.
Do you think you will get sound in the future? Or
Just send me an email. I'll send you the link. Okay. I'll send you the link to anything I couldn't. All right. Okay. So the first one they built was Little Falls. You remember Little Falls with the kayakers? Remember that? Okay. So they had to build it around Little Falls. So here is an outline of it. Okay. There's 3 wooden locks. They're right down here. Okay. This is the canal. See this? All right. And then typical for these canals, you always have this dam that was out here to drive water into the canal. All right. So this thing was 2.16 miles long, was 6 feet deep, 25 feet wide, 20 feet wide at the bottom, and was a 38-foot drop. A 38-foot drop, you gotta have locks. Okay. You can't just have someone go down the that's like a toboggan hill, Okay. So there was a 38-foot drop. Now, what were the problems? One of the problems was they never built a permanent dam. They never had a gate. Now, a gate isn't a lock. The gate in front of a canal keeps all the flotsam and jetsam out of the canal. You've been on the Potomac. Everything's floating down there. So they never built a gate for this. So the flotsam and jetsam would go in the canal. They'd have to clean it out. There was something called the Falls Branch, a little stream. I think it's right here. And they didn't build a culvert to go underneath. The Falls Branch dumped into the canal, which meant it was a buildup of sediment. And they originally made the wooden locks out of They made the locks out of wood, not stone. Interesting, yeah.
Is it bridge, ink bridge?
No, no, I don't think so. It's a good question, but I don't think so.
This is by the DC one, isn't it?
Yeah, this is Little Falls. This is just right above. Yeah, but I'm not sure, but I don't think it is. Okay. All right. Now, just to give you a sense of this thing, in 1817, Benjamin Latrobe, and can be found in the book I wrote, which is called Potomac Marble, History of the Search for the Ideal Stone. Benjamin Latrobe, in looking for an ideal stone to rebuild the Capitol, finds it in Maryland, across the river in Maryland, and there's a quarry, and he writes, the best thing about this quarry, besides the fact that the stone is beautiful and it's right on the river, so it's accessible, is I don't have to use any land carriage. What does he mean? He means he could float it down the river. Why? It's 1817. Why can he float it down the river? Because of Little Falls and Great Falls. Those canals were done by 1817. And then he reports, unfortunately, the Little Falls locks collapsed. And that's exactly what this is about. The locks, they built them of wood, they didn't build them of stone, they collapsed, etc. So it had effect on it. Huh? This? I don't know. This is probably when it was built. This is probably 1793, 94. The work began in 1791.
You don't have a reference.
No, I don't have a reference. Actually, it's true, I don't. It was just floating, yeah. Okay, let's get to the mother of all, Okay. The next thing, and the biggest one, was Great Falls. You've all been to Great Falls. You've all seen the ruins of Great Falls, okay? Well, let's look a little more closely. Here's Great Falls. Right here is the entrance, okay? And the boats would come in, and they would wait. Here's the waiting room, all right? And then when it was their turn, they would go lock 1, lock 2, lock 3, lock 4, lock 5, and then down into the gorge again, into Navigable Gorge. So there were 5 locks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 77 feet. Most of that right here, okay? It was 6 feet deep, 25 feet wide, and 20 feet wide at the bottom. But it wasn't just a canal. It was an industrial power center. Look, in those days, if you had moving water, you didn't waste it just on transportation. What else did they do here? And you can go today. I lead tours there. Well, not really. I take classes there. And you can see where there were openings in the canal, that they would open the canal so that the water could run a water wheel to run a mill. You can still see that in the ruins. Okay, so what did they have? I don't know if we can see them here, so I'm just going to tell you. There's a sawmill. There was a sawmill. There was an iron mill. There were all kinds of mills. They had workshops back here, and they had worker residences. And this was called Matildaville. And Matildaville was land owned by Lighthorse Harry Lee. His wife died in 1786, 85. Her name was Matilda. And he named this town, which he built, Matildaville. And what was the idea of this town? The idea of this town, it would prosper from the traffic, the canal traffic, and the mills that were able to operate based on the moving water. Okay? You see that? And that's really something. So that was, hold on, let me catch up to myself because I don't want to miss something. Oh, I know what we're going to do next. We're just going to go through the details. Okay. Rumsey was the president of the Potomac Company, yes. I said that earlier. Okay, so I'm getting close. Okay, here we go. This, what you're looking at here, is the entrance to that canal. This is the entrance from the river, that the boats would come in here, okay? All I'm saying in this is the boats would come in here, and here it goes, and they would then enter into a long canal. Here it is, filled with water. But look at the stonework. Isn't that interesting? Do you notice there's no the stones are not worked by stonemasons. You don't see drill marks or anything like that. I guess they just took local stones, but that's been sitting there for 230 years. You know, that's amazing. And look at it, it's not like when you see a mill, you know, they build a mill, there's actual masonry stonework, right? Pretty, so that's what it looks like now. This is lock one. All right, now you can see in lock one, this is where the actual lock would be in these inserts. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, but let me show you something else about lock one. If you look closely at lock one, you see this? What color is this? This is red sandstone, right? Okay, so this comes from the famous the Seneca sandstone quarry, and there's John standing in front of the Seneca sandstone quarry. That's where it came from, 10 miles upriver. Every morning, they send a boat, they pull it upriver to the Seneca quarry, they load up the boat with the stones, they come back down the river, and they use the stone. Every day, there were guys who did that. And this is a famous stone because it was used all over Washington, but particularly in the castle for the Smithsonian. All right, so that's the stone. A lot of the stone they use was that. All right, here's a close-up of a lock. All right, it would fit in there. This is the 3, 4, and 5. Right, this is the cut. All right, and you can walk down there. You're not supposed to, but you just push the fence aside. Right? I mean, God, they don't want you. You own this. Why can't you look at it? So you push the fence, so you can walk all the way down to the river, okay? And you can even still see some iron rings in here, etc. So it was 4,300 cubic yards of rock. Rock one to rock, well, I won't go through that, but you can see the drops of the rocks. Okay, here it is again. So this is this. And they used black powder. It was one of the first times that black powder was, anyone here shoot black powder? Yes, you know what I mean. They use black powder, which is, I'll go into that in a second if we have time, but they use black powder to blow this up and to carve it out. Okay. This is what's left of Matildaville. Not much. I'll just show you what's left. There it is. That wall is what's left of Matildaville. But you see those little green daffodil sprouts? I like to think that they were planted by a housewife from Matildaville and that they're still coming up. My sister lives in West Virginia, and when you walk through the woods, you see the remains of old farmhouses. Now trees have grown in and stuff, and everything is erect because of the trees and the shrubbery, but there's always some daffodils coming up in the woods, right? And I think that's what these are for. So I like to show people that and say, there's two things left from Matildaville. Oh yeah, lucky for us. I didn't even think of that. That's great. Okay, all right. Now, I'm not going to ask you to look at all this because it's too much unless you want to. But look at the bottom here. All right, there were 100 workers, 67 are enslaved. That's a question I'm going to get asked, so there's your answer. 823 total workers in trade and occupation. They work 16-hour days, 6 days a week, with Sunday off from March 1st to the end of December. One of the ways I think they were able to get through that is because look at this whiskey ration. 3 gills a day. That's 12 fluid ounces of whiskey. That's a lot. I'm not a whiskey drinker, but that's a lot, isn't it? Yeah, that'll get you through the day. So, yeah, these guys were tough. They were very tough. Here's the breakdown of the workers, etc. But I'm just going to go through that quickly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I didn't think about them. I didn't look at them. I don't know. How are you guys doing? Because the time, I'm worried about the time. I would like to now tell you about how they dug out that canal, how they went through that. You okay on that? All right. Okay. 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 So the way you do this is you use a star drill. This is a little one. They use big ones. You see why it's called a star drill? All right. So the way a star drill works is if you have 2 guys working the hammers, you see that's 2 guys working the hammers, it's called double jacking. So the guys are called a jack. All right. Then there's a guy holding the star drill, and he's called the shaker. So the jack takes his 8-pound sledgehammer, slams the star drill, the shaker turns it a third. He slams the star drill, shaker turns it a third. This goes on, and at a certain point, the shaker says, hold on, and he blows the dust out of the hole. And then they keep going, and when it gets too deep, they use what's used called a deep hole mud spoon. See that? To get the dust out of there. And then they dig sufficiently deep for blasting. Okay, now, they were paid a salary, a very small salary, plus a penny an inch, and they were expected to do 5 feet a day. And they did. They did more. Some people did more. So there were reports of these guys just doing this over and over and over again. Now, I like to tell people, and I may have told you this when I was here 4 years ago, but I'll tell you again. This is a real piece of folklore, this thing. It's in so many songs and so many folk stories, and you never even realize it, okay? I'll give you an example. John Henry. You all know John Henry, right? John Henry said to his captain, a man ain't nothing but a man. But before I let your steam drill beat me down, I'll die with a hammer in my hand. What's going on? John Henry's got a star drill, and they brought in the steam drill. And John Henry says, I can beat that steam drill. And he has a 12-pound hammer. Man, they used 8-pound hammers. This John Henry was a magnificent person. He had a 12-pound hammer.
What's the actual size?
Of what? Oh, you know, it's like this, and around it like this. But it comes in all sizes. All sizes, yeah, it really does. Okay, now, second verse answers the question you all asking yourselves. John Henry says to a shaker, shaker boy, you better pray. If my 12-pound hammer misses that little piece of steel, tomorrow will be your burying day. Anyway, there's songs all over about this. Now, John Henry, of course, he was probably digging the tunnel, the 4-foot tunnel. They don't really know what John Henry was doing. But what they do is you dig these holes, and you dig a series of holes. Let's see if I have a picture of that. Do I? No, I don't do. I'll just tell you. You dig a series of holes, maybe 6 inches apart, all right? And then you fill up the holes with black powder. Now, black powder ain't dynamite. Dynamite is stable. Dynamite was invented in the 1850s. We're talking now in the turn of the 17th to the 18th century. This is a very unstable thing, this black powder. It's subsonic too. I mean, dynamite is supersonic. It's one of the reasons it's called dynamite, for dynamo, for Greek, for power, right? So anyway, they use black powder. They put the black powder in the holes, and they tamp it down and cover the holes with wax, clay, or something. They put a metal into the hole to create a hole for the fuse. Now, safety fuses were invented in the 1830s or late 1820s. A safety fuse is what you'd expect to use, right? It burns, let's say it burns an inch a minute. I made that up. If you want 10 minutes to get the heck out of there, use a 10-inch fuse. It's simple arithmetic. They didn't have that. What they did is they would take brown paper and they would stick it in the morning's bacon fat. All right? And they would stick that in there, and they'd stick it in there and there and there and there and there. I keep tripping over that. And then they would light it and get the hell out of there. Well, the egregious, you read about the egregious accidents, it was terrible. These guys who were blasters weren't paid, they were paid the same amount as the laborers. They weren't paid extra. Anyway, that's how they did it. So they would blast this out, and then they would take the rock away. And they kept doing that. It took years. It took years. I think it was 500, I had the number somewhere, 500 truckloads or train loads, 50 train loads of debris they had to take out. Any questions on that? Anybody want to be a double jacker? Anybody? No? Okay. You've done this, right? Okay, now boats. You want to know about the boats, right? The boats were 70 feet long. They were 10 feet wide. They had 4 guys on it with poles, all right? They would sit, like, let's say they were bringing coal down from that town up in Maryland. What the heck is it called? Cumberland. I wish they got that. From Cumberland. Well, they had to wait for the water. They had to wait, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. They had to wait for there to be sufficient water to get down the river. So the boats would load up with coal in Cumberland, I got it, and they'd sit there sometimes for weeks. Now, what do men do when they have nothing to do and they're just hanging out? Well, they smoked, they gambled, they cursed, they flirted. One author says they even developed their own songs and games. There began to be a river culture around this, which is really fascinating. That's Robert Cash. He just passed away last fall, unfortunately. He talks about that. And these guys would wait and they'd wait, and then the rain would come and the river would rise and down they would go. Now, it was best for them when the river was really high. You've been near the river. You've seen it when it's really high. It's terrifying, right? You would never go on the Potomac when it's high. I fish. I would never do it. That's when they went on. All right? When the river was, and they would go on the thing, the boats were loaded with wheat, usually barrels of wheat. Big thing was wheat. And they had a canvas cover over it, like a Conestoga wagon. And there'd be a guy in the front, two guys on the side, one guy in the back. They would shoot down the river. And then when they saw a buoy, which meant that there was a sluice, thank you. God, thank God you're all here. There was a sluice. They would shoot down the sluice. And they would continue all the way down there. These guys were amazing. In my book, which I recommend you all buy and read, there's a chapter called Ode to the Rivermen, simply because they were amazing. And they'd shoot down to Great Falls, and at Great Falls, they would wait until it was their turn and then head on down. How did they get back home? Interesting. Well, what they would do is two things. One is they would sell the boat for firewood, they'd break up the boat, and they'd walk home. They walk for 208, wherever they lived, okay? Or they would take the boat back with them by pulling the boat back upriver, back up the sluices, back up all the way upriver, and what was provided for them was capstans at certain places. You know what a capstan is? It's where a boat, you tie up a ship, right, a big capstan, so they could pull themselves up, and there were hooks like along Mather Gorge. Before you get to Great Falls, the locks, supposedly there's still hooks on Mather Gorge. I don't know. They say they're still there. There were hooks that people used to pull themselves up. So they would put, I mean, these were different kinds of people, right? These were amazing people, and that's what they did. That's how they got home. Okay. Quickly, the only reason I show you this is that you'll see, if you can see the third column, the biggest thing they did was flour. Why? Why flour? Well, think about the times. What's happening in the 1790s in Europe? It's the French Revolution. There's a whole disturbance of production of agriculture. So more and more particularly our wheat, now that we've switched because of the people in Lovettsville, we've switched from big grain, big kernels, corn, we've switched to wheat and other grains. We have the ability to feed the world. And basically, there's a tremendous advantage for American wheat. And that's why this flour is coming down here. And how did it get ground into flour from wheat? In all the mills that are all up and down here, like Goose Creek, where there were like 5 or 6 mills. There were like 70, I think I got 75 flour mills in Loudoun County. All right. And all that, they're producing flour. That flour is going down out to Georgetown, which is being shipped to the Sugar Islands and to Europe and all over the world. What happens in 1803? You have the Napoleonic Wars. If you think that didn't disrupt agriculture in Europe, it certainly did. So American grain was very important. You can see here, and of course, whiskey was second because, you know, I don't have to explain that, do I? Okay. All right. I think I'll skip this. This is too much arithmetic for this time of the day. It's what it actually cost. They got a barrel cost. They got $7 a barrel at the market, okay, and they paid 22 and 12.54 cents as a toll for each barrel. All right. Okay, what this says, if you can't see it, was it profitable? No, it wasn't profitable. They paid a dividend once. In 1802, 305 boats paid a toll, carrying 1952 tons of flour, whiskey, and tobacco. In 1893, it went up to 493, but there was no profit. In 1805, they collected 5,000 in tolls, but had 19,000 in expenses. What wiped this out is very similar to the C&O Canal, is the tremendous expenses to maintain it. They're always, you know what they're always complaining about? That people would take these sluices and they turned them into fish traps and ruined the sluices, all right? And it happened all the time. Okay, so it wasn't profitable. They spent, by 1817, $650,000 on improvements and only collected $162,000 in tolls. So in 1823, because everybody was complaining, there was a commissioner's report. The commissioners went down the Potomac River, starting at that town I never can remember, and they went down the Potomac River in canoes. Thank you. They went down the Potomac River in canoes to test it, and they reported it was a disaster, that the sluices were filled up with garbage, that they couldn't move, that they cut, I mean, it was a complete terrible report. It really was. And they said that the company's not met the terms of their charter because you could only go down the river 35 to 45 days a year when it rained, when the water was high enough. So basically, this idea of having sluice navigation didn't work. I mean, the canals worked, Little Falls and Great Falls, but the sluices didn't work. It just was a disaster. So there was a convention held to develop a successor, and basically that's what the C&O Canal was, a successor to the, to this canal. And they, in 1828, they took over all the assets of the Potomac Company. There it is, 1828. Now, so after 43 years of existence, it ceased to exist. Okay. So this is Frederick Lloyd Gutham, who wrote this wonderful book on the Potomac River, which is also somewhat poetic. I'm just going to read it, take 2 minutes because it's worth it. Up the river and beyond the falls, which commerce would soon find no barrier because of the new canal, were rich farms, and the river stretched on, a navigable waterway, threading the mountain passes to the very spine of the Appalachians. Here began a road, remember the road? Over the mountains, which Washington had known for 50 years. In the mountains were iron, coal, forest. In the valleys were wheat and cattle. Every stream was a potential for a mill, creating manufacturing centers for the world trade. You see this vision. This is Washington's vision. Bulk cargo broken down and shipped inland markets. The rise of manufacturing would extinguish slavery, eliminating the greatest divisions of the nation. Trade over the mountains would unite east and west. Washington, D.C. wouldn't become a town of just poor people and politicians, but would be a great industrial town in which all the industry, all the products would come to Washington, and it would use it for manufacturing. You know, this was the vision, all right? And this vision, a lot of things disrupted this vision. But what I just want to show you before we talk about that, here's a modern map of the river systems in the United States. What's missing? It's not considered an important river. What happened? Well, you had the Louisiana Purchase, you know, you had the opening up of the Mississippi, you had the treaties with Spain. Basically, we became a continental republic. So this little river here became far less important, okay, than in Washington's view of it, because the country grew so rapidly. Here's another sensitive. Here's a river map of based on water, the amount of water. Here is the Potomac River. This is obviously the Mississippi, right? Here's the Potomac, right? Where are we? Here. This is it, here. Yeah, this is it. Here's the South Branch. Here's the North Branch. So would Washington be upset about this, that his program didn't work? No, he wouldn't, because it actually did work, okay? Because it opened up the way to tremendous trade. What came out of the Potomac Company? The C&O Canal. And when the C&O Canal was started, was the groundbreaking in 1828, when John Quincy Adams, the president, did the groundbreaking. He said in his speech, these great projects, one great project creates another great project. He said that. He says, in fact, right now, what's happening in Baltimore is another great project, a railroad. And John Quincy Adams is saying, this is what happens with these great projects. So this project of Washington, for all its failures and its successes, led to the C&O Canal, which led to the railroads. And what's interesting is it was Baltimore, because of the railroad, that became the big industrial city, as opposed to Georgetown and Washington, D.C. So I think Washington would be extremely happy, despite the fact that the program itself didn't go as he expected. That's the end. Before you say anything, Potomac Marble, The History of the Search for the Ideal Stone. If you enjoyed my lecture, that's my book. I have a webpage, www.potomacrocks.com, which is filled with all kinds of interesting essays. These are the 3 books. If you're interested in pursuing this, they're on the table there. You want to look at them? Oh, that's it. That's the end.
Okay, before you say anything else. You will have noticed we didn't sell tickets for this. What would this have been worth? We want to ask you to say. Anyway, these lectures are free, but we do ask you to contribute. We pass the hat. It's become our habit. We want to keep from having to charge for these lectures. So when the hat comes around, be generous and ask Paul whatever you want.
Oh, yes, the sugar items. Yeah, the British on sugar items. In the Caribbean. Okay. In the Caribbean. And it's most of those, I mean, other people know more than I do. Most of those islands, they were growing sugar, and there was enslaved labor, and they fed them using basically import. I don't know. I mean, Haiti certainly was, but I don't know all the islands. Okay. Yes, sir. In which Great Falls locks were done by I think 1804, so they were built between 1802 and 1804. First little fall, first the easy stuff, you know, the bypasses, and now we're going to get down to work. We're going to find an engineer who knows how to build locks, and they started doing that. The Erie Canal was 1825. Don't forget, it was way before that. Yeah.
Do you know how the labor was organized?
The labor? Yes, they had 2 work gangs of 50 each. Initially, they used indentured servants. They bring them over from Europe, and they found out that 25 to 35% of all indentured servants ran away within 1 year. So then they decided to get enslaved people, and they ordered what I said. They put an order in to the local plantations for that.
Again, what was the name of the company?
Potomac Company.
Okay.
That was it, the Potomac Company. Any other questions?
And George Washington owned that?
No, he was the president.
Oh.
It was a stock company. There are a lot of owners. Yes, sir.
As you walk along the C&O today, let's say the section between Point Rocks and Brunswick, you see these little islands that parallel, and they look like they might have been part of that network of bypass or sluice.
I have the same, in fact, some of the islands have a horizontal cut right through them.
Yeah.
And I said, did God do that? Or did George Washington do that? I don't know, but that's because what they say in all this literature is it wasn't documented. They didn't document any of this. I mean, they just didn't. They had these gangs. I'll take care of that later. They had these gangs of workers led by a supervisor, and they just did what they thought was right. But I think you're right. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Exactly. Any other questions? Yes, sir. They get raised. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they went debt. They went into debt, yeah.
The cameraman, is he yours?
The cameraman?
He's filming.
Oh, I don't know.
Obviously, he's not yours.
No.
Are you giving him the rights?
That's
We'll
work it out. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The books that they built, Richmond, they had a book called Bateaus.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
But they didn't go back, they were made out of lumber that was turned into things that were built. And they all walked back.
Right. Yeah, they used bateaus and different kinds of relative things like bateaus. And Washington's a bateau over in Mount Vernon, if you want to see it. It was there a few years ago. And you're right, some of them would just break them up for firewood, and some of them would bring them back. I mean,
Some of them became shoes and.
yeah. It's like in houses probably around here, who knows, right? Yeah, that's true. Yes, sir.
George Washington also
Yeah, I think you're right. Any other questions? What?
Why did you ignore Great Falls on the Maryland side?
There's a Great Falls on the Maryland side? I have no idea.
He's funny.
I spent years talking to John here. John knows everything there is to know about the C&O Canal. And quite honestly, you know, I've had it with Maryland. I'm looking at Virginia now, you know?
Well, have John do a talk on the C&O Canal. John.
Any other questions? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome.